Welcome to Two Rivers Tuesday. We are back, and we are going to give the people what they've been waiting for a long time.
And that is Maggie telling us some stories about what she was like as a teenager.
Oh, no. Oh, God.
That was not
where
actually
I was going.
where you were going with that. So sorry. I
What
know
is the
where you're
story?
going with that. Hey, before we jump into that, I just want to wish friend of the pod, Freddie Genther, a very happy birthday. Today, he turns 32. When we are recording this, he turns 32 years old. So if you know Freddie, make sure you wish him a very happy birthday this week. And really, I just wanted to say friend of the pod. Don't you hear people say that? I hear people say that all the time. Like, yeah, he's a friend of the pod.
I don't feel like I'm cool enough to say that.
Well, we are cool now.
All right, so do you want a story about me as a teenager, or do you want our Chick-fil-A food review?
Oh, I totally want a story about you as a teenager. And then we'll go Chick-fil-A food review.
Oh, man. I need to think of one. I was just a punk. I was just very rebellious, I was rebellious about, like, unnecessary things. Not, like, drinking, partying rebellious, but just, like, not tucking my shirt in at Christian private school rebellious.
Oh, wow.
And, like,
Wow. Get out.
crazy.
I can't believe you got a job at a church. You didn't tuck your shirt in. No, wasn't there, like, I feel like there was something in your past that had to do with a door not being on the hinges.
Oh, yes. Okay, so, like, I wasn't really high school, but, like, middle school, elementary Maggie was, like, very ragey.
Okay.
So there was, like, lots of anger fits, and I would slam the door, destroy my room, just, like, take the house down.
Yes.
And one of the consequences was I lost my door and, like, every single thing in my room.
Wow.
So, like, I remember for some reason all of my clothes were even, like, moved out of my room.
That's
I
next
didn't
level.
have, like, furniture or a bedspread or anything. Like,
Really?
Yes, it
You
was
were
like a jail cell.
You were a prisoner.
Yes.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That is amazing.
So, and then there was a time where they tried, like, running for a consequence. So I would have to, like, run laps in the cul-de-sac. All
Wow.
sorts of things. I
Thanks
would get
for-
really upset.
Thanks for being vulnerable
Yeah.
and sharing that.
I remember one time having a Propel. Remember when those were a thing?
Oh, yeah.
And I just opened it in my room and just what's the word I'm looking for?
You just sprayed it
Sprayed
everywhere.
it everywhere. It just got everywhere. I can remember, like, taking my mattress and throwing my mattress across the room, like, just rage.
Wow.
Yep, I was crazy.
Yeah, and now God has, like, totally transformed that and
Yeah.
turned that rage energy into a passion for what?
Passion for the things of the Lord.
That's very true. Yeah. That was a pretty good that was an off the cuff story there, Maggie. Like, it made me think about the difference in punishment. So you were like, that was like such a punishment for you, right? Like, I was thinking when I was a kid and I was rebellious, and I was usually really bad with my words when I was younger, you know, like I just wanted to, like, destroy my parents with my words because, you know, I didn't like them calling the shots, right? So, they would punish me from going outside. Here's what's funny. I had everything at my disposal. I didn't have to go to my room. I could watch TV. I mean, at one point, I think when I was in 6th grade, we got a Nintendo. And, like, I could do any of these things. My punishment was that I could not go outside, and that was like death to me. Like, I was a prisoner in the house with the technology of the day, right? With the TV, you know, in the early 90s, you know, use whatever was on TV. It was the only thing you could watch, you know. But anyway, that was my punishment.
That hurts.
Wow. Okay, so let's move on. That was story time. I just wanted to throw you a curveball right out of the gate. Where are we going?
Our food review. Do we need our food review?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we talked about doing that last time we were on the podcast.
So you had the pimento cheese sandwich and the new milkshake. What were your thoughts?
Okay. This sandwich was excellent. Delicious. The pimento cheese, if you like pimento cheese, is creamy. Okay. And that's like, so that adds a total new dimension to the Chick-fil-A sandwich. I loved the jalapenos on it. That was very good. The honey makes it sweet. So it was like a great experience. It was like a bunch of flavors like in that thing, and I'm doing my, if you're listening to this, my hands are like I'm holding the sandwich right now, and I'm thinking about it. My mouth is watering. But also the way I'm holding it is with a wrapper because it is extremely messy.
And John doesn't like to have messy hands.
Oh, I don't. Have we talked about that on this? Okay,
tactile defensiveness.
Tactile defensiveness. Thank you. I feel so known that you know that about me. Yeah, that's great. Well, what did you think of the sandwich?
I haven't had the sandwich.
Oh, you didn't have the sandwich.
I did have the milkshake.
That's right.
I felt like the sandwich, with me being like in my 3rd trimester of pregnancy, would just be a lot of heartburn for me personally.
Yeah.
But I did have the milkshake, and I really enjoyed it because it has, I think it's like caramel cookie. So all throughout the milkshake is like little crunchies, and that was lovely.
Yeah, I liked the little added texture there. It was interesting.
Yes.
It's not my favorite milkshake.
Cookies and cream.
Cookies and cream at Chick-fil-A might be like my favorite milkshake of all time.
Yeah, I agree with you.
So good.
If you were to order the sandwich again, would you modify it in any way?
Yes, I would get the spicy, because apparently you can do that.
Ooh.
I wanted to go just, hey, how you guys think, like how you make it. Standard sandwich with all the fun things on it. Now I would try it spicy, and I would probably say, and if you got any more extra jalapenos back there, go ahead and throw them on there, because I like spicy.
That was Jake's thoughts as well, as he would get more jalapenos.
Okay. Yep. More jalapenos. That's great. Good job though. Well done, Chick-fil-A.
Delicious. If you haven't tried it, go get you some. All right, on Sunday you talked about your first job and job titles. So remind us again what your first job title was.
Well, my first job was at a grocery store, and I was just a grocery store. I was a bagger, and I worked in all the different places you can work in a grocery store. But after about a year and a half of that, my first job with a real title was working for a construction company. I was a site manager. And I did confess to everyone that I gave myself that title. Yes. I was a site manager. Basically meant I gathered up all the subcontractors' trash that they threw around all over the sites, and then I burned it.
Yeah. That is actually a really important job, because I have heard that if that trash and food gets left like inside of a house, that it attracts pests.
Critters.
Isn't that gross?
That's very gross.
You
do
did
not
good
want
work.
critters. That was good work for about 2 weeks.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah. My first job was a barista at a cute little cafe called Common Grounds.
Common Grounds.
That's
Aw, that's great.
But then my first like big girl job was business office manager at the assisted living home in town.
Yeah.
And I was way underqualified and underprepared for that position. It was really hard.
Business office manager.
Yeah.
That is quite a title.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. With my psychology undergrad, I started doing all of the HR and like legal stuff and accounting stuff, and I just had no clue what I was doing.
Hey, quick question, since we're so not anywhere near like where we're going yet. In your first job as a barista, would people ever order things and then you would just do whatever you wanted to it, and then tell them that that's what it was, just so you didn't have to like make what they wanted?
No.
Would you ever be like, I don't know where the goat milk or whatever it is, so I'm gonna use this whole milk instead.
Probably, I'm sure.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, we're just putting fear in everyone,
Yes.
all the listeners' minds about like whether they're really getting what they ordered.
What they actually ordered.
They ordered that skinny, that extra grande skinny.
Yes.
But it ain't skinny.
Yeah, I order things half sweet, and that like leaves a lot of room for variation.
Yeah, I got you.
Yeah, that's how it goes.
Okay.
All right, so let's get back on track.
Yeah.
On Sunday, you talked about job titles. The reason you kind of open with this is because we are so tempted to put our identity into our titles.
Yes.
And that is just like human nature. That's one of the first questions that gets asked at the barbecue is, what do you do? And we put a lot of our worth and value in our titles. But the kind of contrast and what you were pointing to was that our most significant title, or a more significant title to kind of hold tighter to, is our title as servants, because we are a people for his own possession.
Yes.
So we looked again at 1 Peter 2, talking about how we are a people for his own possession and how we are to draw our identity from that, but that is very different than our cultural moment, right? So kind of describe a little bit of how our culture views if we are to be someone's possession or not.
Oh gosh. Well, yeah. I mean, our culture is like, no, no, no. No one possesses me. I don't belong to anyone. No one calls the shots in my life. That is very much a kind of a strong overswing, right? I mean, like there's an element that's in there somewhere of just like, protecting yourself, right? Like it's probably there somewhere without really trying to unpack all of that. But at the end of the day, there's something in all of us. It's called our sinful nature, like our broken hearts that don't want anyone to have any say over us,
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that's very much where our culture is right now.
Yes. Yeah. I think we have just a rebellious lean where we don't want anyone to tell us what to do, especially if it's something we don't want to do or doesn't feel right to us.
Yes.
So that is something that as Christians we are having to renew our minds about, because we actually do have someone who can and does tell us what to do.
Yes.
And so if we are just constantly giving in to that, no one can tell me what to do, I'm the boss of me, I'll do what I want, when I want, how I want, then it's hard for us to come to God and willingly and joyfully submit to him as our master.
Yes.
So I think that's a muscle that we need to flex more often, but that it's hard. So that's kind of where you went on Sunday. And you talked about the word servant, or sometimes translated slave, in the Bible. Can you unpack a little bit about what that word means in the Bible versus our understanding of it?
Yeah. Well, I read, if you were there on Sunday, I read quite a bit from the preface of the ESV Bible, which I don't think I've ever done in my life, especially as a pastor in a sermon. But I thought it was important because I think they've taken great care to translate this word from the Hebrew and the Greek into English and use its contextual variants. So, when we hear the word slave, we are thinking like oppressive, racial, ownership of people as property to do whatever we want them to do, and to strip away any rights that they may have as a human, and it attacks dignity, and it attacks like personhood, and like there's so much awful when we hear the word slave, and rightfully so, right? Like 18th and 19th century America, and probably around a lot of other parts of the world, horrible with this, right? Even today, I mean, there's slavery even today where people are being captured and held against their will, and they're being made to do things. I mean, there's human trafficking and gosh, so many atrocities, right? But so that's what we start just immediately spool up when we hear that word. But in the Bible, they were using words in that day that they had servitude and even what they would call slavery that was different than what we are reacting to today, right? So like it was more of a thing where you could come underneath someone's authority and work for them in order to get back on your feet. And I unpacked that in greater detail in the sermon, but this was especially true in the law that God gave to the people of Israel in the Old Testament. God was very concerned about making sure that people were well cared for. Yeah. And if someone, they lost their livelihood and they couldn't provide for their family, they could become a servant of another family. But it wasn't like they were to work without wages or to be, to be stripped of who they were, their personhood. Like they were to be treated well and even released after 6 years and then blessed on the way out. So like we see God's heart there that is so different, so very different than what we are reacting to when we hear that word.
That's very helpful. You did more study on this, so let me know if this is accurate to your understanding. Wasn't it such that God was telling his people treat your servants so well that they want to stay, and treat your servants so well that it kind of shows them what it's like for them to be my people. Like that they would be treated so well that it gives them an example of like, oh, if this earthly master treats me so well, how much more would this earthly master's Lord treat me well? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think I understand what you're asking, and I don't know that. So I would say yes to the second part, but maybe on the first part, it wasn't so much like, hey, treat them so well that they would never want to leave you, because I think the heart would be that they would get on their feet and then be out the door and crushing it, and then they'll do the same for somebody else, you know? So I think that's how I would respond to the first part. But the second part, I do think that there's a picture in here of, as we see oftentimes in God's law. And shout out to Women's Bible Study, Leviticus coming up. You know, you're going to see this a lot. But God is trying to show that He's trying to show parts of who He is, right? And so here's what it's like to serve under the Lord's leadership and to allow Him to become Master and Lord.
Yeah.
Like, you will be so well treated. There's nowhere else you'd want to go.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, in preparations for Leviticus, I've heard the phrase, the laws reflect the values of the lawgiver. So we see all throughout the Bible the way that God is instructing and giving laws for how servants and other people are to be treated shows that he has a very high value for servants and how they're treated. And he is a good master, right? So it's like when it comes to who we would want to own us, or who we would want to be a slave to, a servant to, God is really the only good option that we have. But talk a little bit about some of the other masters that we tend to serve.
Yeah. Well, just this morning, I was reading in my devotion time, Matthew chapter 6, I believe. I wrote it down. In Matthew chapter 6, this is where Jesus is talking about, hey, don't store up treasures here on earth where moth and rust destroy, where thieves break in and steal. Store up those treasures in heaven. He talks about where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. And if we've been around church or the Bible, we're familiar with those passages. Like, hey, let's not hold and cling too tightly to the things of this world. But then Jesus says something interesting. He's like, no one can serve two masters. And that language it's a variation of this word doulos, which we were talking about on Sunday. It is very much a picture of servitude or slavery. And Jesus is saying, like, you can't serve God and fill in the blank. In this particular case, he says you can't serve God and mammon, which was this idea of materialism and worldly wealth and success would be kind of like your way to joy. And he's like, you can't serve both. So I just think, like, I want to serve Jesus. Yes, Jesus is my master. That makes so much sense. He died on the cross for me. He's changing my life. He's done so many good things for me. But I also like, stuff. Or in particular for me, I was just thinking about today how I serve the master of my appetites. And in particular, when it comes to food, I mean, we're joking around and talking about food this morning. I would eat that Chick-fil-A sandwich like every day, except I'm only allowing myself a certain amount of like treat tickets a week, for me. And that fried food item is a ticket that I have to hold preciously, right? But anyway, my appetites are often my master, and I obey them. And then I usually end up feeling gross afterward, So it's like, is that answering your question?
Yes. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I think that we end up being slaves to our flesh, and is essentially what you're saying, is the things that we want and things that we desire, we can become a slave to.
Yeah.
How is God a better master than those things? So like, if you are a slave or a servant to God and you submit to him as master, why is that, or how is that better than submitting to your flesh as master?
So the first thing that pops into my mind is not a very deep spiritual answer, but I don't know that when I've obeyed the Lord, I've ever had a hard time sleeping through the night. But I know that when I have eaten way too much meat or just a really heavy meal, and I went overboard and I got too, I ate too much or whatever, like, which is totally my thing. I've had a hard time sleeping through the night, and then I wake up and I'm groggy and I'm tired, and I have like a meat hangover, and like I've never experienced that when I've just been obedient to the Lord.
Yeah, no,
so that's just one example.
I think that's great, and just to kind of keep pulling on that thread, no other master gives us rest the way God does.
Yes.
When we serve the good master, so to speak, we can actually find rest, and because he is for our good.
Yeah.
And any other master will not give us rest. Like, I just think about like serving the master of productivity or work or efficiency or just like wanting more and more stuff.
Yeah.
None of those masters will ever like satisfy or give rest to your soul. Every other master will just like sabotage your soul. And God is the only master that you can trust will bring good to your soul. And so that's why I think that even though it's against our nature to want to submit to anyone, we have to like be aware that we are a slave to something, and we can either be a slave to something that's good for our soul or a slave to something that's bad for our soul. So I think that is good to think through of like, okay, what am I a slave to? What am I serving? What are some of those masters that I'm letting kind of dictate my life, and how can I submit to the actual good, true master?
Yes.
Was there anything that didn't make the cut in your sermon?
Yeah, there's this great quote from Brennan Manning. I didn't have time to throw it in there, but just when we're talking about just wanting to find our identity in what we do or in our titles, kind of like what people think of us and kind of like what we think about ourselves. He writes this, the false self buys into outside experiences to furnish a personal source of meaning. The pursuit of money, power, glamour, sexual prowess, recognition, and status enhance one's self-importance and creates the illusion of success. And then that leads to what he calls being an imposter. And he says the imposter is what he does. And that's like so at the core of kind of what I'm trying to communicate to us is that we are who God says we are. We are not like what we do or what people think about us on the surface. We don't have to try to be something that we're not. We don't have to be an imposter, right?
Yeah.
We don't have to fall for the illusion of success and identity and worth. There's greater identity and worth found in the gospel. So that quote was great. And I think I would just add, probably something that I will share in a sermon, coming down the road. But there's another way I could have gone with this whole idea of being a people for God's possession. And it comes out of Exodus chapter 19, where God calls the nation of Israel his treasured possession. And it's one of my favorite words in the Bible to unpack. It's a Hebrew word that talks about really being God's treasure. And when I think about being a treasured possession, what God's saying to his people is that, like, I treasure you, I value you. And again, he's already made it clear, not because you've done anything yet. He hasn't even given them the law to obey yet, right? So he treasures them. And one of the things that I think about when I think about a treasured possession of my own is that there's a reason why it's a treasure. It has a story. And God knows there's a story with this people, and it goes way back, even farther than Abraham. But just think about Abraham when he left his home. God called him out to something new, and Abraham listened and followed. There's just this great story of God's faithfulness and leading his people, and like God wants to have a story with us. That makes us a treasured possession of his. And part of that story is coming underneath his authority, and like we obey him, we listen to his voice, and then like we join him in what he's doing, and all of a sudden like we're experiencing this cool thing that happens when we are like locked in with what God's doing. And now we've got this story to tell about this thing we were praying for, or like when God put something on my heart and I reached out to a friend and it was exactly what they needed to hear. Mm-hmm. And it's like, there's this story that's forming, like I've got a story with God, and like that's kind of like contagious and it's exciting.
Yeah. And I think the reason that taps into something that brings us joy and purpose and meaning and excitement is because when we do those things, we are living out of our identity as his servants. Yes. We're willing to follow his lead. We're willing to serve his family. Mm-hmm. That was another thing you talked about on Sunday is, are you serving the master's family? Mm-hmm. And I think when we take those steps of obedience to love on and encourage and sacrifice for God's family, we enjoy that because we're living out of who we truly are. Yeah. And there's something about that brings us so much purpose, because that's a good place to live out of, because you're living out of your true identity, not grasping for something that's temporal and external and fragile. Yes. That's something that you can live out of that will kind of sustain in a sense, because it's what you were made for.
Yes. Good way to tie that in.
Last thought is, you ended the sermon and you said you belong to him forever, and that's a good thing. So I just kind of wanted to end the podcast on that note, is that you belong to a good master. All other masters do not have your best interest in mind, but you can trust that God is a master that is for your good always, and you can submit to him as your master, and that's a good thing.
That's a good thing. It's good to belong. Isn't that right, Dwight?
If you're just listening, John just shook the head of a bobblehead on our table. So. All right, well, thank you for listening, and we will be back next week.
See ya.